While the Atlanta Braves did go on to win 89 games and reach the postseason in 2024, for most fans, I think they'll look back at this season as one that was very painful. On today's episode, we'll look at the injuries, dive into the numbers, and I'll give you my final thoughts and feelings on the 2024 season. We'll do all that on today's episode of Locked On Braves. So let's get into it.
You are Locked On Braves, your daily Atlanta Braves podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, and welcome back to Locked On Braves, part of Locked On Sports Atlanta, where we cover your favorite Atlanta sports teams each and every day. I'm your host, Jake Mastriani. You can follow me on social media at Shortstop Ball. Check out the podcast there at LockedOn_Braves. Subscribe to us on YouTube if you're new. Hit that thumbs up button. Leave me a comment down below. Let me know if you're an everydayer of the podcast or if you make Locked On Braves your first listen of each and every day. Always enjoy hearing those comments from you. And as always, let's keep the conversation going down in that comment section below and be very respectful to others. If you're listening on the audio version, leave me a 5-star review on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. It's another way that you can help support me here at Locked On Braves. On today's episode, I'm going to do my final recap of the 2024 season. Now, going forward, we are going to recap some individual seasons for players, but also preview them going into the offseason. But this will be my final thoughts, feelings on 2024. And we're going to, first of all, start off by looking at all the injuries, because you can't talk about 2024 without talking about all the injuries. Dive into some of the numbers, why the offense was so bad. Is there one thing in particular we can look at for why the offense struggled so much? And then we'll also just give you my final thoughts and feelings on the season overall, which I think many of you will probably agree with me. I think it's a pretty painful and unenjoyable season on the whole, and that's crazy to say for a team that won 89 games. You can't start the season with a big return, or you can start the season with a big return on FanDuel. Please place your $5 bet, and you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed at FanDuel.com to get started. Well, you can't start talking about the Atlanta Braves 2024 season without talking about injuries. And I think when most people look back at 2024, their immediate thought is going to be that was the year that we were just riddled with injuries, big injuries, impactful injuries up and down the lineup that really cost the team from doing something potentially really special. And I'm going to do these in order of when the first time a player got hurt. The case for Ozzie Albies, he got hurt twice. Sean Murphy strained his oblique 6 innings into the season. The Braves had their opening day lineup together for 6 innings this year. That alone right there should tell you this was a pretty frustrating season. And maybe many people aren't as worried about Sean Murphy getting injured on opening day and missing 2 months because everybody hates that trade and thinks that Sean Murphy is terrible. I am not one of those guys. I certainly was not one of those guys coming into the year, and I still don't think I'm one of those guys. I thought this was going to be a big year for Sean Murphy. I got him on a bunch of fantasy teams. I was excited to see him take over as a clear number one, to put that second half behind him from 2023, which seemed just kind of fluky and maybe injury related. And I was excited for him to come out and have a big season. He gets injured 6 innings into the season, is out for 2 months, and then just never got on track after that. Even when he was playing good for a little while coming back, so was Travis d'Arnaud. And so you had this every other day situation. Both guys ended up struggling down the stretch in the final month. Once again, that's 2 years in a row now. So they got to figure that out. What is the best plan for those guys? Does Sean Murphy need to be playing more often? Does Travis d'Arnaud need to be playing more often? But I don't know that the every other day thing is really good, but that's a conversation for another time. And again, I'm going to do individual podcasts on a lot of these players here over the month of October. Murphy's certainly going to be one we talk about a lot. But opening day, 6 innings in, you lose your starting catcher for 2 months. He'd go on to play in 72 games. It's the fewest games he's played in a full season. He accumulated just 0.8 WAR on Fangraphs, pretty much all of that coming from his defenses. He was just terrible offensively, and like I said, never really got going. And then Spencer Strider, the NL Cy Young favorite coming into the season, he made just 2 starts this year before getting shut down with a forearm injury. He later have internal brace surgery to remove a bone fragment that was pushing on his UCL. And I think that is important for Braves fans to hear And remember, it wasn't full-blown Tommy John surgery. It was an internal brace to remove a bone fragment that was, pushing on that UCL. Certainly not great, but this wasn't full-blown Tommy John. And when they were in there, they said the ligament looked really good, which is why he could be back as early as opening day for 2025, because this wasn't full-blown Tommy John surgery. But he made just 2 starts, did Strider. He gave up 7 earned on 9 innings pitched. So again, pretty much a lost season for Spencer Strider. And then there's Ozzie Albies. On April 15th, Ozzie went on the IL first time with a fractured toe after getting hit by a curveball. He'd only missed 10 days. He wasn't out very long with that and came back. And then in late July, he'd fractured his wrist, making a tag, and missed almost 2 months. When he did return, he clearly wasn't 100% and could only swing from the right side. Again, we're going to have some individual podcasts talking about these players a little bit more, but since 2019, Ozzie has injured his hamstring, his elbow, his wrist, his knee, his neck, his foot, his finger, his hamstring again, his toe, and his wrist again. Ozzie has been very injury prone, and I think that's just a fact at this point. You can say every player is not injury prone until they get injured, but Ozzie's been injured a lot in his career so far. And I think that's, again, just a fact at this point. It's something you have to build in for. On the season, Ozzie slashed .251, just .303 on base, a .404 slug with 10 home runs and 8 stolen bases, just a 95 WRC plus. For those who aren't familiar with the WRC plus model, 100 is league average. So that's, below league average for Ozzie, and just 1.3 F4. Now, maybe the biggest one of the year, although I'm going to argue in a minute that maybe Austin Riley ended up being the biggest one for when it happened. But Ronald Acuna Jr., on May 26th, he tore his other ACL, and he would miss the rest of the season. He only played in 49 games and accumulated just 1 F4 after having a 9.1 F4 season in 2023. So right there with Ronald, look, 9 WAR is pretty crazy, and he may not ever duplicate that. Not many people have multiple 9-win seasons. But right there, you're losing 7-8 WAR with one player who was gone less than 2 months into the season. He'd slashed .250, .351, .365, just 4 home runs, but 38 runs scored in 16 total bases and a 105 WRC plus. So he was just above average. And a lot of people point to that, the fact that Ronald wasn't good to start the year. Look, we're going to talk about this a lot in the offseason too. When we really dive into the offense, a lot of really good hitters struggled in the first couple of months of the season. Ronald didn't get to have that big second half that a lot of offensive players had after struggling in the first couple of months. And even with that, he scored 38 runs in 49 games with 16 stolen bases. I mean, the Braves would have loved to have, and got on base 35% of the time. Again, Braves would have loved that at the top of their lineup, and it would have made such a huge difference. Austin Riley, on May 12th, he left a game with left side tightness. The hope was he'd only miss a few games. He never went on the IL, a weird situation, which the Braves did a couple of times this year, but he ended up missing 15 days, and it took him about a week to get back going again after missing that much time. Now, he'd go on to have a huge month of June and July, and he had a .529 slugging percentage in August before getting hit in the hand and fracturing it and ending and missing the rest of the season. So again, Riley, who also got off to a slow start, he was finally starting to heat up in that second half like a lot of hitters did, but then he gets injured. And he ends the season slashing .256, .322, .461, 19 home runs, a 116 WRC plus, and 2.4 F4. And then Michael Harris, running the bases in a game on June 14th. He pulled a hamstring. That cost him 2 months. After a rough month of August coming back, he turned it on in September and was the Braves' best player by far in the postseason. He was 8 for 12 in steals before the injury, which is not great, but just 2 of 4 coming back. And I talked about a lot of, the Braves needing that speed element from Harris, and it just wasn't there really, especially after the hamstring. Now, if you just consider Acuna, Ozzie, Riley, and Michael Harris, your 4 most dynamic players, Ozuna and Olsen, are great, but they are there primarily for their power. Acuna, Ozzie, Riley, and Michael Harris, they can do it in different ways, whether it was speed, Austin's more kind of that all-around guy, can hit for average, power, maybe not steal bases, but is a good base runner. Just accounting for missing those 4 guys. Last year, the Braves got 604 games from those 4 players. This year, they got 368. Last year, with those 4 players, you got 22.1 F-WAR. This year, you got 6.7. Now, other injuries, those were just some of the injuries for the Braves this year. They also had Pierce Johnson, who went on the IL with an elbow injury early in the year. You had A.J. Smith-Shawver, who went on the IL with an oblique. Minter, who went on the IL with a hip injury in May. And then again, later in the year, that would cost him the rest of the season. Waldrop went on the IL with an elbow injury. Ray Kerr went on the IL in June and ended up having season-ending Tommy John surgery. Laureano went on the IL in June with an oblique. Arcia missed time with a tooth injury. Max Fried went on the IL with a forearm injury he felt in the All-Star game. Ronaldo Lopez missed time with a forearm injury. He'd missed time again in September with a shoulder injury. Soler hurt his hamstring just when he was starting to heat up with the Braves. This one is the most telling of all of 2024. When you tell 2024 and about all the injuries, Whit Merrifield comes over, a guy who hadn't been injured at all in his career. Before even playing a game, he cuts his finger. Gets a cut on his finger and can't play for several days. He gets hit in the head and misses a couple days. And then he breaks his foot. Like poor Whit Merrifield, hadn't been injured at all in his career, comes over to the Braves and gets injured 3 times in like a span of 2 weeks. And then the final one, the real kick in the pants, Chris Sale missed his last start of the season and missed the postseason altogether with back spasms. Again, it's not just a lot of teams are going to have several injuries. This team had significant injuries to impact players for a long periods of time. No team, no other team in baseball, I believe, would be able to overcome that and still win 89 games. And it's not just, those players missing time. It's hard to get in any type of rhythm when guys are consistently getting injured, out of the lineup. You're constantly have to shuffle the lineup. You're putting guys in spots where they don't need to be. You're trying to fit things out and figure things out. I know everybody wants to get mad at this coaching staff, and that's why I really wanted to take time and lay out the injuries that the Braves suffered, because I really don't think any other team in baseball could overcome that and accomplish what this Braves team accomplished. And look, there was more than just the injuries in part of the season and part of the struggles for the season, and I'll touch on those later. But you cannot talk about 2024 without talking about the significant impact of these injuries that it had on this team. And not just guys that you missed, but guys that you missed for long periods of time and guys that were in and out of the lineup with a constant, shuffling of the lineup, trying to piece things together, figure things out. That is frustrating about this season, because they still won 89 games. And I see Todd Twilley saying how many losses can be attributed this season to poor coaching management. I think you can put a handful on the coaching staff. And that's what's even more frustrating, because if you had all these players, you obviously would have won more games. You had a little bit better coaching, you would have won more games. It's a team that would have been right up there with the Phillies for the division and maybe the most wins in baseball. But again, we can talk about coaching, and we will later. But you cannot talk about 2024 without talking about the impactful injuries to this Braves team and what they had to overcome to ultimately still win 89 games and still get into the postseason. Obviously, this was not a team offensively that was able to compete in the postseason, but just the fact they got there with everything that I just went through is pretty amazing. But next, I want to dive into the numbers for the season, both offensively and on the mound. We'll look into that, get some good and some bad, and we'll see if there is something in these offensive numbers, one thing we can really point to what really made this offense struggle, other than losing all of those players that we just talked about. We'll get into that here next. For most of us who like collecting cards, the idea of spending $2,000 or more on a Ronald Acuna Jr. or a Mike Trout rookie auto, it's just not in the cards. I love collecting, but that's some serious money to drop. Thanks to slab packs from arenaclub.com, now it's possible to score gem mints for a fraction of the retail price. Arena Club is the only repack that provides real value, a complete view of all possible cards, and clear hit rates for each one. After your pools are revealed, they'll immediately be placed in your showroom for safekeeping, selling, trading, or auction. The Arena Club grading process is accurate, fast, and transparent, with a full grade rationale provided and an explanation of how your card was scored. Whether you're buying, selling, trading, or displaying, Arena Club is the card collecting platform you have to check out. Right now, you can get 10% off your first slab pack or card purchase by going to arenaclub.com/lockedonmlb and use code LockedOnMLB. That's arenaclub.com/lockedonmlb, code LockedOnMLB for 10% off your first purchase. Thank you for making Locked On Braves your first listen of the day. Go check out Locked On MLB for your second listen, or go listen to Locked On Guardians, Locked On Royals, Yankees, all those teams that are still in the postseason. If you're just a big baseball fan and want to get caught up on everything happening in the postseason, you can do that on YouTube or wherever you get your podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. It is your team every day. Now, what's coming your way this week on Locked On Braves? Like I said, we're going to do some reviews of certain individual players this season. Some of the big ones, obviously, like I mentioned, Sean Murphy, Austin Riley, Ronald. We're going to get into some individual recaps and previews for the offseason for those types of players. So that's what's going to be coming your way most of the rest of October. We'll also have a mailbag episode later in the week where I'm going to answer some questions I didn't get to on last week's mailbag episode that will more so be looking towards the offseason. Let's dive into the numbers for 2024. We'll start offensively. The Braves finished 15th in runs scored with 704, fourth in home runs. They still got their home runs, 213 of them, almost 100 less than last season, but still fourth overall. They were 15th in average at 243, 16th in on-base percentage at 309, 9th in slugging at 415, 17th in walks with 485. They had the seventh most strikeouts at 1,461, 26th in sacks and with 9 sacks bunts. I thought that was just interesting to throw in there. The Braves did have to play a little bit of small ball this season. Maybe they should have played a little bit more. They grounded into the 6th most double plays. If you were watching, and know you are because you're listening to this, and you were listening to the podcast, we talked a lot, especially in the second half, about all the double plays. They had the 11th highest batting average on balls in play, which might be surprising to some of you. A 291 BABIP, again, 11th best in all of baseball. What I cannot understand, and what still just frustrates me, is what happened after April. Like, what really changed after April? Because the injuries didn't really start until the end of May when you lost Acuna. Yeah, you lost 10 days of Ozzie in there. You lost Sean Murphy on opening day. Not great, but still, what changed after the month of April? In that month, they were third in average at 260. They were third in on-base percentage at 333, seventh highest slugging at 417, which means they weren't slugging the baseball. They only had the 19th most home runs in April, but they were second in doubles with 57. They had the 15th most strikeouts and 19th most walks, so weren't striking out quite as much, still weren't taking their walks. Now, they did have a 322 batting average on balls in play, which is really high and speaks to probably some of the elevated average, but it still just doesn't make much sense. Maybe it was just a fluky month, but for the month of April, for the most part, and really for me, that timeline starts around the last week of April, where I really started to notice the change offensively. But for the first 3-4 weeks of the season, it looked like the Braves offense. Like I said, other than the home runs not coming, which I believe there's something for that. I believe there's a reason for that. But they weren't getting a ton of home runs in April, but they were still getting their doubles. They were still getting hits. All of that hard contact was paying off. They weren't quite striking out as much. And then it never happened the rest of the way. So it doesn't make sense. Was it truly just good batted ball luck in April and then terrible batted ball luck the rest of the way? Did something change? I don't think anything changed philosophy-wise for the Braves, because as we've well documented, they didn't change anything philosophy-wise. They still were looking for that slug. Did defenses change? Did defenses start playing deeper to cut off those doubles? I don't know. It's really mind-boggling to me that for the first 3.5-4 weeks of the season, this looked like the Braves offense we know from last year. And again, that's really before the injuries started. The big injury started at the end of May with Ronald. What really changed for this team after the month of April? And that's something I still don't quite know. Other than the baseballs being dead, which again has been well documented, that explains for the home runs. I don't know that it necessarily explains everything for the bad batting average, the strikeouts that went up a lot. It's really frustrating to see that, to see the offense just change so drastically and never really recover from that. But that's really what it was. Again, for the first 3.5 weeks of the season, this looked like the Braves offense that we have come to know. But after that, it was just dreadful. And again, the injuries are a part of that, but it's also some bad luck in there as well, I think, can be attributed to it. I think it's also just poor philosophy by the Braves. So again, we'll talk more about that when I give you my final thoughts. Let's get into the analytics. Some people don't like analytics. It's part of the game. The Braves had a 10.1% barrel percentage. That's the second best or second highest in all of baseball. That means you are putting the baseball on the barrel 10% of the time, and that's generally a stat that you look at for slugging percentage. The Yankees were first, the Dodgers were third, the Orioles were sixth. I'm mentioning those teams for a moment to kind of legitimize these analytics. Braves were second in average exit velocity at 42.6%. The Yankees were first, the Orioles were third, the Dodgers were fifth. The Braves were first in hard hit percentage, 42.6%, in front of the Orioles, Yankees, Mets, and Dodgers. The Braves had the 11th highest expected batting average at 247. The Braves had the third highest expected slugging percentage at 437. That was 22 points lower than their actual. Only the Yankees and Dodgers were ahead of them in terms of expected slug, and the Orioles were right behind them. And I mentioned those three teams specifically. The Yankees, Orioles, and Dodgers were all top four in runs scored and home runs. And they had they were in the same category with the Atlanta Braves in barrel percentage, exit velocity, hard hit percentage. But yet they got the results the Braves didn't. So what is the difference? Because those teams who were I don't think anybody would argue. I know the Orioles struggled to end the year. I don't think anybody would argue those were three of the better offenses in all of baseball this year. The Yankees, Orioles, and Dodgers. I think you throw the Mets in there too, who are up there for some of these stats. So they had the same hitting philosophy as the Atlanta Braves. They got the results the Braves didn't. So what is the difference there? What is the difference between those three teams who scored all the runs and had the same metrics as the Braves and the Braves and what they weren't doing? Was it really just the strikeouts? You look at the Yankees, Orioles, and Dodgers, they had the 18th, 19th, and 20th most strikeouts this year. That's a difference of about 102 to 135 strikeouts between the Braves and those three teams. So that's 100 to 130 more empty at-bats. Does that account for the big difference in discrepancy in runs? Maybe. I think that's part of it. I think maybe even the bigger difference for the Yankees and Dodgers, at least, is the walks. The Yankees and Dodgers were 1 and 2 in walks. The Yankees had 187 more walks than the Braves. The Dodgers had 117 more. We talked about it a lot, and Chipper Jones talked about this in his comments, which we discussed, the Braves philosophy, and he thinks that they don't focus enough on on-base percentage. If the Braves were able to take some more walks, get on base, then maybe those home runs, which they had the fourth most in baseball, they're more impactful. Maybe if you don't have as many, 100 more empty at-bats, those home runs, and when you do make contact, that loud contact is more impactful. So again, it's hard to really nail it down. I think it's a lot that goes into it. It's poor decision, poor approach at the plate in certain situations. I think it's too many strikeouts that led to too many empty at-bats. It's not enough patience at the plate to be able to earn your walk so that those home runs are more impactful. I think all that plays into it for why this Braves offense wasn't as good. And again, obviously all the injuries, which we talked about in the top half. We're going to do more deep dive into the offense and exactly what went wrong, but that's just kind of high level. Again, the Yankees, Dodgers, and Orioles were all right there analytically with the same type of offensive philosophy. They got the results and the Braves didn't this year. Is it just pure bad luck? Was it because of the difference in strikeouts and walks? What is the case? Again, we'll dive deeper into that this offseason. But let's talk about the good here for a moment. The numbers on the mound. Braves were first in ERA. They were third in WHIP at 1.20, a 3.49 ERA, I should have mentioned. The most strikeouts, 1,553, and that was without Spencer Strider, which is absolutely crazy. They issued the 6th fewest walks. They were 8th in average against at 236. They had the 3rd fewest wild pitches, which I think you got to give some credit to the catchers on that. And you look at the bullpen as well. They were 3rd in ERA at 3.32, whip 1.18. They were 6th. And K to walk ratio, they were 1st at 3.45 by over 20 points, as they were 2nd in K per 9 and walk per 9. So again, the best pitching staff in baseball. Hate that it was wasted with a terrible offense, but this pitching staff was electric and probably the most fun thing about this Braves team in 2024. We'll look at the analytics for pitching as well. They were 2nd in barrel percentage, just 6.9% barrel rate allowed. Exit velocity, they were 1st, 36.8%, which is crazy. The Braves offense was 1st in hard hit percentage, and their pitching was 1st in average exit velocity against. That should lead to a lot more wins and be one of the best teams in baseball. That just wasn't the case this year. They were 3rd in expected batting average against at 235 and 1st in expected slug against at 372. So they avoided the long ball. They avoided giving up the extra base hit. This pitching staff, again, one of the better pitching staffs all around I think we've seen in quite a long time. So again, loved it from the pitching side of things. Last year, you had the best offense we've seen historically. This year, you had one of the better pitching staffs we've seen historically for the Braves. Just get it together. Can we combine it together in 2025, put it all together, run it all the way through the postseason? Can the Braves get it done? Everything is there with everybody healthy and performing like they're capable of for that to happen. All right, next, I'm going to give you my final thoughts and opinions, feelings, whatever you want to call it, on 2024. And we're going to kind of put that season to rest and move forward the rest of the way and get into the off season. But I'll give you my final thoughts and feelings here next. This episode of Locked On Braves is brought to you by Booking.com. Booking.yeah. With summer travel heating up, especially travel for baseball games, it's time to explore the U.S. cities you always secretly wanted to learn more about as we get into the postseason and summer wraps up. We are officially fall. We put up fall decorations here over the weekend, but you can get ready, or you can take a trip. If your season's over, you want to go take a trip to another city. Maybe it's not a baseball city. I don't know why you would ever do that, but wherever you want to go this offseason, make your plans on Booking.com. With hotels, bed and breakfast, vacation rentals, resorts, and so much more on Booking.com. You might just find your perfect stay, even in your baseball rival's city. And again, you got the postseason happening. If you're just a great big baseball fan and you want to go check out a postseason game in a rival city, you can do that and use Booking.com. The right stay can make you a fan of any U.S. city, even your rivals. Book today on Booking.com on the site or in the Booking.com app. Hey, NFL fans, you can start the season with a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. So when you get a hunch in the middle of a game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. You'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet at FanDuel.com. And if you're still like me and you're into baseball season, you can check out the latest World Series odds, the NLDS odds, NLCS, all of that. I'm sure there's something there on Ohtani, as they've had that there all year long, but you can check all that out at FanDuel.com. Also, make sure you visit FanDuel.com/playsafe for tools and resources to help you stay in control of the way you play. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. I want to mention a little bit of news before I give you my final thoughts on the season. Chris Sale threw a bullpen on Friday. They said he likely would have been back and ready for the NLDS. That's cool, whatever. Good to hear, I guess, but still a little bit painful. That was more so just a test, so he felt good going into the offseason and nothing to worry about there going into 2025, hopefully. Alex Anthopoulos plans to bring back Snit and the entire coaching staff. Some of you won't be happy about that. Again, we'll talk about that probably on tomorrow's podcast. We're going to dive more into the coaching staff side of things. Mark Bowman reports that the Braves plan to pick up the options of Ozuna, Bummer, and Travis d'Arnaud. Didn't say anything about Whit Merrifield. But those are 3 options that Mark Bowman is reporting the Braves plan to pick up. All right, let's give my final thoughts on 2024 because I'm ready to put this season to bed. This was not a fun year. Just plain and simple, this is probably the least amount of fun I've had watching a Braves team that I can remember. And most of that is due to the injuries and the offensive struggles because the pitching staff was great. Pitching staff was fantastic. Watching Chris Sale go out and dominate, watching Spencer Schwellenbach emerge, those were probably 2 of the best things about this season. But just my feelings as a fan, when I think back on 2024, I just didn't have a lot of fun watching this team. And I've discussed this before. You take out Spencer Strider, you take out Ron Acuna Jr. in the first 2 months. Those are guys are must-watch TV. When Strider is starting a game, you must watch. When Acuna is up at bat, you must watch. Who was really left on that team that was just must-watch for you? And we're still some great players. I love watching Michael Harris when he's going, especially defensively, what he can do. Austin Riley, when he comes to the plate, I want to watch. I still enjoy Matt Olson. I mean, there are guys who come to the plate I enjoy, but there aren't guys where I'm pausing it, putting the kids in bed, coming up because I don't want to miss that at bat. Ronald is like that. Strider is like that. Even the wins this year didn't feel fun at times. And I know my guy Grant, who I do the postcast with, says all wins just matter the same, and they're all ugly. Or you can win ugly, you can't lose pretty. Whatever the saying is from Grant. I went to this Blue Jays game on Sunday. I don't remember what the date was, but whenever the Blue Jays played the Braves at home on a Sunday, it was a walk-off win, and it felt bad. Like it felt bad. The way that they had to do it, the offense struggling all game long, the way they won it on a couple of errors by the Blue Jays, it was a weird fielder's choice hit. I don't know what they ruled it as by Sean Murphy. Like even the win just felt ugly. Like it felt bad. And I agree with Matthew here. It didn't feel like we won 89 games. And it's just, again, that's just my feeling. And I know fans of other teams may come in here and hear Braves fans or hear a Braves podcaster complaining about how painful the season was because they won 89 games and went to the postseason. It just felt bad, and there just wasn't a lot of fun. I mentioned this too when I was at that Braves game. I saw Acuna jerseys, I saw Strider jerseys, I saw Ozzie jerseys, I saw Riley jerseys. Those were the jerseys that were most prominently worn, and most of those were Riley and Acuna. You were missing those guys for big chunks of the season. Again, the fun of the team was just taken out when you take out those dynamic players. And again, I like watching Ozuna and Olsen come to the plate. They got some big power. But when you tell me, and I've had other fans tell me, that the most intriguing and exciting thing about this season was watching replacement players play and seeing what they could do. And I've had so many fans tell me that what they enjoyed, because I asked about a month or two ago, what gets you excited about this team, watching this team? And several of you said, I enjoy watching the replacement players and see what they can do. That's what's exciting about this season, is watching guys who are picked up off the scrap heap, guys who even Brian Snitker himself said were rejects, guys that were dropped by other teams. That's what you were most excited about to watch at the end of this season. And again, I understand that. Like it's fun to kind of root for the underdog story and guys who are getting a chance. I get that. But I'd much rather you tell me that you're excited because Ron Acuna Jr. is coming to the plate. See what can he get another 40-40 season. You're excited to see if Austin Riley can get another 30-100 season. You're excited to see, Michael Harris play Gold Glove defense. See if Ozzie can reach 30 home runs, what he can do. That excitement, that fun was just zapped from this team this year with all of those injuries. And just for me personally, that made 2024 one of the least amount of fun seasons. I don't know a better way to say that I've had in a long time. Look, I've been a fan for a while. I've went through the 15, 16 years. There was so much expectations, and there should have been so much fun on this team, and that was just taken away. That makes this season not very fun for me. Again, I love baseball. I watched pretty much every game and pretty much every inning of every game, and I will always do so. But just looking back on this season and on this year, it just wasn't fun. There was not a lot to be excited about. I can only really think of 2 games off the top of my head that I really got excited about. 3, but one of those came in a loss. The Ozzie bases clearing double against the Mets, that was one of the most exciting moments of the season, and the Braves lost. The Travis d'Arnaud, walk-off home run was great, but then we had to deal with Chris Sale news. It's just the best game that I can remember, again, just off the top of my head, was opening day. And when you had, and even in that game, you lost Sean Murphy for 2 months. It's like every time the Braves had a good moment this year, it came along with bad news. It came along with an injury that the Braves had. And it just felt like that all year long, where nothing went the Braves' way. A bunch of injuries took away some of their most exciting players, and it just wasn't fun. And that's about as well as I think I can put my thoughts and feelings on the 2024 season. There are a lot of things I wanted to say, but we're obviously a little over time. But I think you get the gist here on the 2024 season for me, which I am happy to put behind. I cannot wait for spring training in 2025. But that 2024 season was just absolutely rough. And so I want to thank you all again, because numbers view-wise here on the podcast were great. So I want to thank you for sticking with me through all of that. But just on full honesty and disclosure, it was a grind doing this podcast in 2024, because it just was not a lot of fun watching this Braves team. So again, thank you as always for joining me here. Thank you for sticking through this season with me. I'm looking forward to this off season, because I think it's going to be an exciting off season, maybe more exciting than the actual season we just had. And I'm excited to get back at it for 2025. And I cannot wait to put 2024 behind us, because that was a brutal season for the Atlanta Braves and for its fans. Again, thank you for making us your first listen of the day. Check out Locked On MLB for your second listen. Subscribe on YouTube if you're new. Hit that thumbs up button if you haven't already. Leave me a comment down below. Follow us on social media at shortstopball, at LockedOn_Braves. Thank you to Protect PR, Patrick McCarthy, Pedro, Matthew, Epperson, Jay Is for joining us here live today. Todd Twilley as well. Joel Ray, I appreciate it. Barry Walker, I appreciate you all joining me here on today's live episode. Make sure that you rate, review, and subscribe to the Locked On Braves podcast wherever you get your podcast, and we will talk to you next time.